All right, we're continuing our photography as art series, and one of my favorite topics is always the influence of the magical city of light, Paris, France, my favorite city in the world. As you know, I've already given presentations on its influence on painters and sculptors, but now we're going to focus on the city's influence on photographers. I'm going to begin with the American artist Man Ray, since he probably had the most widespread influence on the other photographers that we're going to look at today. Man Ray was born to Russian Jewish immigrants in Philadelphia. And one thing I found interesting, I think I'm presenting 5 or 6 photographers this morning, and all but one I know have a Jewish background. And I'm wondering, well, that's interesting, the draw to modernist avant-garde photography among the Jewish community. I find that very interesting. He was born to Russian Jewish immigrants in Philadelphia. His birth name was Emanuel Rednitsky. After the family moved to New York City, however, they experienced a lot of anti-Semitism, and so they changed their last name to just Ray. Well, he went by Manny as a boy, and so when he entered the art world, he just shortened it to Man, so he's known as Man Ray. Some of you have probably heard of him. I've also discussed him in past presentations, but I think it's been quite a while. Well, Man Ray started out his training as a classical artist, a painter, and he immediately preferred the avant-garde the moment he went in 1913 to the famous or infamous, depending on your viewpoint, Armory show in New York that introduced America to the modern art of Europe. Well, Man Ray immediately took to the avant-garde and began painting from abstracts to this sort of surrealistic image. He was also enamored not only with surrealism, but the Dadaist movement in art. Well, he bought a camera around 1918 in order to document his paintings. That was his original purpose, but the camera soon became his preferred medium for creating art for quite a while. In the summer of 1921, Man Ray moved to Paris, where he would spend most of his artistic career. He began creating photographs without a camera, which were called photograms. He came up with a new name for them, and he named them after himself. He called them rayographs, but they're actually photograms. That's their industry name. So here's the definition of a photogram that I found off of the web. A photogram is a photographic image made without a camera by placing objects directly onto the surface of a light-sensitive material such as photographic paper that you see on the right here. That's a rayograph, and then exposing it to light. So basically, he's producing large negatives. That's what's produced through his rayograph process. Ray used the technique to create incredible surrealistic reliefs and imagery, but I want to focus on some of his more interesting portraits. The model for this photo was a famous one in Paris, known as Kiki de Montparnasse. She hailed from Montparnasse neighborhood. Notice how the lines on the mask and the real model's face complement one another to create a strong balance in this composition. So what I'm going to do this morning is I'll usually show an image and make some brief comments, and then give you a moment to reflect on the work, to process it, to react to it, respond to it in your notes. This one is called Noir et Blanche, done in 1926. Let's move on to the next one. Despite his highly surrealistic early images, Man Ray became a highly sought-after fashion photographer. Look at the unusual angle for this portrait. The model's face is essentially hidden. It's unimportant because it's the dress by designer Ilse Schiaparelli that I think Man Ray believes is the real art in this image. Take a moment. Just observe the perspective that Man Ray chose, the lighting, the composition. Man Ray knew everyone associated with the avant-garde in Paris, including wealthy patrons of the modernist art form. Everyone wanted to be photographed by Man Ray. Look at the amount of light coming off Peggy Guggenheim's dress. You would think there are light bulbs hidden behind her fabric. The model for this image was a real model, the stunning Lee Miller, who traveled to Paris specifically to learn photography herself from Man Ray. While she was Man Ray's student, she became his lover as well for a few years, and they would work together, and they accidentally landed upon a process of developing called solarization. See, Lee Miller accidentally left an image exposed for too long. But she and Ray were fascinated by the effects, and so they perfected the process. On the left, the model's face is caught in shimmering relief through this solarization process. One of those happy little accidents Bob Ross taught all of us to appreciate. Now, Lee Miller would eventually break Man Ray's heart. The lips in the painting by Man Ray you saw at the very beginning of this presentation. Remember, there was a painting behind him of lips that he had done. Well, those are Miller's lips. Now, one thing about Miller, she became an accomplished photojournalist in her own right and became well known for her work during World War II. She and Man Ray did reconcile and became great friends later on. Now, our next photographer I want to share is Ilse Bing. I hope I'm introducing you to some artists that you may not be very familiar with. Ilse Bing was both an avant-garde artist and early fashion photographer. She was born to Jewish parents as well in Germany, but moved to Paris in 1930 to develop her talents. She would remain there until the start of World War II, which forced her to move to New York City, where she spent the remainder of her life. She said, "I didn't choose photography, it chose me." A lot of artists express that same sentiment. "I didn't know at the time. An artist doesn't think about it first and then practice her art. She is drawn into it. Today, I can explain how it happened. In a way, it was the movement of an era when people started to look with new eyes. And that is why everybody wanted to go to Paris, because it was in Paris where people were encouraged to see the world, to explore their inner life with new eyes and new perspective." She said, "My eye is most often attracted by a minor detail hidden in a banal conglomeration of things. A leaf fallen from a tree, a puddle of water in a street, a furtive expression on a face. The picture makes it possible to immortalize the reality of a moment." I love that quote. Here is one of her most popular images, a seemingly banal moment as well. Her style was called documentary humanism by the writer Lincoln Kirstein. And at first, the subject matter for this is incredibly simple, but when you see the lines, the form, the composition, becomes quite stunning. Here we have a moving railway part. She seems to see the most profound things in the most ordinary places. Many of us who've ridden trains have passed from car to car and stepped through and maybe saw an image like this, but paid no attention to it. But when you're an artist, like Ilse Bing, you have an eye for the profound, even if it's in the mundane. Here's another human subject, the ballet errant in Paris. She really captured these dancers at a perfect moment. And here's the final image of Ilse's I'll show you before moving on to the next artist. This too looks like a rather banal scene. At first glance, really, there's nothing beautiful about this composition, maybe the contrary. But the longer we look at it, the more pregnant with some enigmatic aesthetic quality it appears to have. And we might not be able to put words to it, but our eyes are drawn to what's happening in this image. And I want to emphasize what is happening in this image. She said, nothing in the compositions remains still. Even if in appearance it is, there is a dynamic and a movement that can be felt. Take a moment to look at this and see if you're feeling that movement. Our next artist is Germaine Krull. She was born in what was then East Prussia, but now it's in Poland. Her family moved to Munich, Germany when she was a teenager. She was an international and eclectic female photographer, a real rebel by nature, acquiring the nickname when she was young, Mad Dog. Can you imagine a woman being called Mad Dog? Well, she was arrested a few times when she was young for her political views before making it to Paris in 1926. Krull was famous during her time for her avant-garde photo montage work and for her photojournalism. Here she has taken a subject that not many of us would see as pregnant with artistic possibilities, industrial vats attached to some large machine. And she's made a composition that is rather stunning. Now here's an interesting quote. The camera need not invent, she says, manipulate or fool. It does not paint, nor does it imagine. The photographer is a witness, the witness of his time. Krull would say that she was merely witnessing a moment, like in this image. But we're going to soon see that Krull was plenty imaginative in creating her compositions. Like in these photos. Despite Krull's words that the camera need not invent, manipulate, or fool, she produced these portraits. It's clear Krull exercised plenty of creativity during the developing process, and I think we can all appreciate the fact that she did. There's another interesting perspective. I'll let you take a moment to enjoy it. She loved metal, taking pictures of metal. And of course, she fell in love with the Eiffel Tower, just a big tower of metal. She loved the patterns she saw in the Eiffel Tower. She viewed this iconic structure from every conceivable angle, walking around it, walking underneath it, walking through it. Her photography became very popular after the publication of a book of her work called Metal, in other words, and it was filled with images like this. People were captivated by them. I'm curious before I move on. Obviously, the design is powerful that you see, but is there anything in the metal that produces a feeling in you as well? Or is it merely the line that produces the feeling in you? I'm just curious. All right, let's move on. Here's a bending street in Marseille. A bend in the street has become art when framed like an artist of Krull's talent. And again, you see those lines of cable similar to metal that she loves to incorporate in her scenes. This image by Germaine Krull is of the Dadaist poet and artist Jean Cocteau. Cocteau told Krull of her artistic method, "You are a reforming mirror. You and the dark room," he used the word chambre noire, "obtain a new world, a world that has passed through the camera's workings and a soul." Cocteau implies that Krull herself was the mirror of reality, not the photography. Krull herself mirrored reality. Armed with her camera, she had the power not only to depict reality, but to reshape it, to literally reform it. Krull may have captured only what she witnessed, according to her, but once she goes to the dark room to develop her image, something more than simply a mirror image emerges. It is reformed and thus transformed by Krull into something quite new. Krull is first and foremost a great artist. And now here's one of the more unusual photographers we'll look at. Born Lucy Schwab, this woman invented an alter ego named Claude Cahun. I hope I'm pronouncing her last name correctly, C-A-H-U-N. She once wrote of herself, quote, "Under this mask, another mask," unquote. Under this mask, another mask. I don't think Cahun thought of a mask as something you hide behind. A mask for her was an opportunity to creatively be someone new and different. Cahun was a surrealist writer and photographer. She was openly androgynous, taking numerous self-portraits which explored gender and sexual identity, mainly in blurring the lines. She also explained about her orientation and gender, quote, "Masculine, feminine, it depends on the situation. Neuter is the only gender that always suits me," unquote. Well, I think she prefers neuter only because it allows her full creative freedom to playfully be any subject she wants to be. She is not trying to hide behind a mask. The mask is the art she is creating. Like this persona. In this image, Cahun masquerades as a bodybuilder, complete with sewn-on nipples, and on her shirt she's written, "I am in training, don't kiss me." So we see the imaginative and playful influence of Dada in this work. And for this day, at least, for this image, she has decided to take on a masculine persona. And in this strange composition, She dresses herself as a little girl and rests inside a large armoire. What in the world is she trying to say? What kind of story is she trying to tell? Maybe she's intentionally keeping it ambiguous enough to allow our own creative imaginations to work with the image. I've reflected on this work, and for me, I have a few responses to it, but one is that I want to ask, are there not times that we wish we could be someone else, not because we dislike who we are, but in a spirit of childlike wonder and play? So perhaps that is what Cahun is inviting us to do, to become a child, taking on a different persona, creating a new story for ourselves. Now, in the image on the left, she has created a sort of, I don't know, a mask of herself using her portrait seen through a thick glass. On the right, Cahun presents herself in the role of a character in an Anglo-Norman drama of the 12th century. I think Cahun was really an actress in her heart who, instead of actually acting in a real drama, used the photograph to give her whatever role that she wanted. Now, she had a collaborator, and many of these images are attributed to both her and a Marcel Moore. Now, who is Marcel Moore? Well, Cahun had a stepsister who was also her lifetime lover named Suzanne Malherbe, who adopted the synonym Marcel Moore, so a very androgynous, sort of masculine type alter ego as well. And they collaborated on many photographs. And their romantic and creative collaboration lasted a lifetime. Again, another character from some drama. It's the texture in the dress, in the hair. That grabbed my attention. What could she be inviting you to do, or to what story is she trying to offer us in such an image? And in this final work of hers, here are portraits of the couple. Cahun has used objects to represent their personas. Notice the persona on the right is smoking a cigarette. I don't know if you can notice that. And the one on the left has matches. So Cahun was always having fun with her art. She really was like a child with a camera, and let her imagination run wild. I think her androgyny, instead of being something that she hid from in the context of Paris, it was an invitation to be whatever she wanted, to take on any persona. She was already very different from most other people, and she had fun with it and used it as a catalyst to play. And I'll close this presentation with one of my very favorite photographers, the Romanian Brassai, which is a pseudonym for, and I'm probably going to butcher this name, Gyula Halash. He was born in the town of Brassai, hence he took that his name from his town, in what was at the time the Kingdom of Hungary, but after World War I, the town became part of Romania. His training started with painting and sculpture, but he is best known for his photography of Paris, earning the name the Eye of Paris. I want to end with him because he, as well as any 20th century photographer, captured the magic, the mystique of Paris that drew these other photographers to the city. He especially liked to capture the city at night. He was a genius at either capturing or creating atmosphere. So take a moment with this one before I move on, and I'm just going to be silent with the next few images. On the left, it's one of Brassai's more popular images. In the image on the right, he imbues an otherwise very common scene with great mystery and drama. This scene is called Steps of Montmartre with a White Dog from Brassai. These photographers that we have examined today in their arresting works have challenged us to not only see differently, but to see what is actually there. Some people say that divinity, sacred beauty, is not absent in the world, but is everywhere if we only have eyes to see it. Well, I think these photographers that we've looked at this morning train our eyes to see this sacred beauty in all sorts of essential moments that we otherwise would not notice. Some of you who know about photography may be surprised I didn't mention the most famous French photographer of the 20th century, Henri Cartier-Bresson, who did this work. Well, in my research, he would require an entire presentation on his own, so I did not include him. Besides, we're already out of time, but I may give a presentation in the near future just on his work, because he's probably the most influential 20th century photographer. So I'll close with that call of Brassai and all these other photographers to view their works as not only beautiful in themselves and striking, but as a means to train our own eyes to see the sacred beauty that is all around us, available to us, if we can start to view our world through the eyes of an artist. Well, thank you very much for your presence. I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Curious to know what you thought of some of these artists, if you had heard of them or not heard of them, as well as which photos did you like and which didn't you like? I hope all of them, though, challenged you in some way. So the floor is open.
Hey, Waverly, it's Marco.
Hey, Marco.
Very quickly, I appreciate all the presentation. Very, very good. And Waverly, thank you very much for introducing us to these great artists. And I just have two quick considerations. One about the women photographers, that they must have been extremely strong-willed women, courageous, trailblazers, because we sometimes forget the time in which they did these artworks. The 20s, even if Paris was the only place probably at that time that would allow women to have that kind of expression. To show those images, or like Claude Cahun, show herself in that weird androgynous persona, etc. Outside of their circle, artistic circle, they would be considered mad, seriously, or evil, witches, really, to be put on the stake again, you know. So
You're right.
Seriously. So the fact that these women were instead going forward and going all, you know, with all their heart into this, it means they were really not only great artists, but as I say, trailblazers, opening the door for women to a completely more expressive world. And then a quick consideration on Brassai that I know by name, but frankly, I didn't know his photographs. I found them exceptional, and there's a tension. It's like something, especially in the night ones, something is suspended, and it's almost, we are called to wait what's going on, what's going to happen. I found them really, really good, because I felt this tension, really, you know, like, okay, and now what's going to happen?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is phenomenal for a photographer, because it gives you not only a set, you know, image, but the feeling of, and now what's going to happen? What's next? You know, it's curiosity, it's tension. It's phenomenal. Thank you, Waverly.
Thank you, Marco. And also, before I make my own comments, Marco is going to assist me next week in looking at more women photographers that were trailblazers and who did extraordinary work. Marco's taken a great interest in some of these photographers, so he is going to be my kind of expert co-host next week. So I'm really looking forward to that. But back to the how courageous these women had to be. Well, imagine a woman in the 1920s earning the nickname Mad Dog. You have to admire a woman who could earn that nickname during that period of time. Really, really extraordinary and amazing. And then Claude Cahun's unashamed portrayal of her own free exploration of gender, I find extraordinarily courageous as well. Just really unbelievable. So thank you, Marco.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right, let's hear some more comments. Oh, before I forget, one of our guests, Patrick Jolly, was cut off by his Xfinity epic fail on the internet. He got cut off as he was about to respond to a question that I don't know if I posted or the group posted, but I'll go ahead and bring it back up to give Patrick a chance to respond if he's willing to do that. We were looking at landscape photography last week, photojournalism, and the question was brought up, why is landscape photography sometimes not considered art, whereas a painting of a landscape is always considered art? So I don't know, Patrick, if you wanted to respond to that now, I'll invite you to do that. Otherwise, you're free to chicken out.
I'll just very quickly, because sort of ancient history. I think probably the distinction is that the act of making the painting takes a lot more than people think. You know, it takes years of practice for one thing, and then you never really truly know what the intention is behind the action itself. For example, when I'm doing my paintings of the wilderness, they're put on canvases that I've prepared way in advance that have intentions written into them. So there's nothing sort of instantaneous about it.
Nothing arbitrary?
Nothing arbitrary, nothing. I mean, the arbitrariness is how you're responding to the environment. But there's sort of, I mean, and then even with some of the camera names, there's an instant sort of reaction or capturing that happens in the photograph and the photographic process that is impossible to do with a painting, which is much more experiential. So, and again, I was really caved in about Xfinity's service and losing the end of the time last week, but I was curious as to my premise that the quote, or my postulate that premise that we looked at last week was just totally misguided, because I think the distinction is either fine art versus craft, you know, and the quote never used the word fine art. It referred to art in general. And I mean, to think that a photographer is not an artist is like, that's the realm of the carny. I mean, like this image that's on the screen right now, if that's not prophetic of the, you know, abstract movement that's going to evolve in the next 40 years, I mean, nothing is.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you just look at that and allow the dog to be a white shape, is that not a Richard Diebenkorn?
Yeah, it's a great image.
Yeah.
The form, the lines, everything is really fantastic and helps the eye move comfortably.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with Richard Diebenkorn, put this image in your brain and then look at his Ocean Park series, which was done, I think, in the 1960s, 70s, maybe. Which now I'll try to bring it back to this presentation today. The thing that I found really compelling, and I mean, I love the Man Ray, I love the Claude, what was her last name?
Claude Cahun, C-A-H-U-N. I may be mispronouncing that.
What a spectacular person. I mean, I would have loved to have met her and hung out with her or him or whatever.
Well, it depends on the day and her mood.
Right.
Yeah.
It's sort of the same. I mean, you know, I get it. So the cool thing about today's presentation is every artist that was introduced to us made you forget about the previous artist.
Yeah, they had their own sort of unique perspective and expression, but they're all, I think we all know, can recognize how talented they were.
And compelling.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
that was the great thing about the Paris moment in the first half of the 20th century. All the art that was produced in Paris at that time was compelling. it was, as Gertrude Stein said, it was the place, it was where the 20th century was.
Yeah.
So extraordinary stuff. Thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate it. All right, let's see. We got time for another comment. One more. Anybody else?
I could say something if no one else wants to. I found this very compelling. And I liked getting that sense that Paris was a place where artists could be safe to be who they were, because I don't see that so much here in the United States. And I also haven't heard from artists around the world that the United States doesn't really, it doesn't make a place where artists can thrive. There's too much of the not taking it seriously. I learned from a Japanese trained man years ago that it takes like 21 different people to make a really amazing kimono, and each person has one expertise. There's just one thing that they do, and he said every single one of those people is considered an artist in Japan. And he came to America and he was shocked because those people were called craftspeople, and it was kind of sneered at. And I know some people don't think much of photography either, just point and click, but it's not. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. There's a lot of walking around, looking, paying attention to the light. When's the light going to be the way I want it? But I love the sense of respect and safety, and this is a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Mercedes. You're absolutely right. I love that word you use, safe. And I do hear that from people who come from Europe or maybe Far East, so they come to the United States, and they do say that the United States in general, there are pockets where this is not true, but in general is not a safe, welcoming place for the artist. The artist is seen as maybe against what makes the society feel safe. They're too rebellious. They're too provocative in their expression. And so they seem more like a threat. I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Artists seem threatening to many in our culture. And I don't know why. All they're trying to do is challenge us to experience life in a more expansive way.